됐어? 오케이. All right. If anybody is watching, then can you text Jiyoung or message? Let us know that this is working. Huh? Or you can comment. Does anybody?
Oh wait, how about I test it?
Yeah, we just have to ourselves.
That's what I do.
Yeah, but it's more fun if somebody who's not here comments. Is it? Did anybody comment? Huh? Nobody's commenting. Okay. All right. Welcome everybody to our first ever live stream of our worship service. We can all stand, or I guess sit, or whatever. For the few of us who are here, we'll stand together. We can worship and prayer. Father, we're grateful. Throughout this world, we pray for different things and the struggles that we're all going through together. But in it, we seek you and we seek your will be done. We give this time of worship for those who are here, for those who are in our homes. We are all safe, but our hearts of worship are always on fire just to give you this time. Pray all things in Jesus' name. Amen. Sing Amazing Grace. How sweet the sound, the Savior was like me. I was lost, but blind like that I see. Towards grace and time, grace and time, grace that feels how precious their grace. Now I first my chains are gone. Chains are gone. I've been set free. God, I said, ransom me. My God's love, the sheep, an empty praise. The earth has promised. The earth has promised to be for the good to shine. Oh God, come be forever. Sorry, the earth shall sing. Sing that one more time. The earth shall sing songs. The sun from here shine. But God come forever. My chains are gone. My chains are gone. I've been set free. God, my Savior, ransom me. I'm to the sheep, and the Lord has found. The Lord has found His love as long as time. My chains are gone. My chains are gone. I've been set free. Got my Savior, yes, I don't know mercy and amazing. My chains are gone. Chains are gone. I've been set free. Got my Savior, yes, I don't mercy and empty. Mercy, my flow. My flow. Mercy empty. Mercy, I don't know why. You step down into time. You listen. It's hard, but oh, spend you. So here I am to work. Here I am to love. Here I am to sing. You're mine. All together. All together, all together, wonderful to you. King of all nations, King of all nations, oh so happy, glorious in humbly to the earth, to create all for us. So here I am to live, here I am to love, here I am to say that you're mine. You're all together, all together, all together, wonderful to you. Here I am, so here I am to worship. Here I am to love. Here I am to say, you're mine. You're all together, all together, all together, wonderful to you. I never know, I never know how much it costs to see my sin upon the cross. I never know how much it costs to see my sin upon the cross. So here I am. So here I am to worship. Here I am to love. Here I am to say don't mind. All together, all together, all together, nothing without you. That's how we see it. All right. Can we pray together? Heavenly Father, we're grateful once again this morning. We give you this time of worship. We pray for your church all the way across the world, for those who cannot meet, to spend this time in community, but that we can unite our hearts together in prayer and worship, to devote this time just to worship together as a community, to dedicate this time on this day of rest, to worship you. For all things in Jesus' name. Amen. Today's scripture is going to be from John chapter 9. John chapter 9. It's 41 verses, but I'm going to read through as quickly as I can. If you have your Bibles, please follow along. John chapter 9 says this: As he walked along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And Jesus answered, neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. When he said this, he spat on the ground and made mud with the saliva and spread the mud on the man's eyes, saying to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. Then he went and washed and came back, able to see. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar began to ask, is this not the man who used to sit and beg? Some were saying, it is he. Others were saying, no, but it is someone like him. He kept saying, I am the man, but they kept asking him, then how were your eyes open? And he answered, the man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, go to Siloam and wash. Then I went and washed and received my sight. They said to him, where is he? He said, I do not know. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had formerly been blind. Now it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also began to ask him how he had received his sight. And he said to them, he put mud on my eyes, then I washed, and now I see. Some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, for he does not observe the Sabbath. But others said, how can a man who is a sinner perform such signs? They were divided, so they said again to the blind man, what do you say about him? It was your eyes he opened. He said, he is a prophet. The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight. And they asked them, is this your son who you say was born blind? How then does he now see? And his parents answered, we know that this is our son, and that he was born blind, but we do not know how it is that he now sees, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him, he is of age, he will speak for himself. His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore, his parents said, he is of age, ask him. So for the second time, they called the man who had been blind, and they said to him, give glory to God, we know that this man is a sinner. And he answered, I do not know whether he is a sinner. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see. They said to him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? And he answered them, I have told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples? Then they reviled him, saying, you are his disciple, we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from. The man answered, here is an astonishing thing. You do not know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, But he does listen to one who worships him and obeys his will. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. They answered him, "You were born entirely in sins, and you are trying to teach us." And they drove him out. Jesus heard that they had driven him out, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered, "And who is he, sir? Tell me, so that I may believe in him." And Jesus said to him, You have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he." He said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. And Jesus said, "I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind." Some of the Pharisees near him heard this and said to him, "Surely we are not blind, are we?" And Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, would you not have sinned? But now that you say we see, your sin remains." Amen. Is the screen working okay? Do you know? I'm not like this, world renowned speaker, but I have had opportunities to be in front of larger crowds for various reasons. And I think this is more nerve-wracking than being in front of a lot of people for some reason. Not because so many people who are watching. For some reason, this is very, very, it's making me very nervous. As we have a couple of weeks as we enter into Easter Sunday, it's kind of unfortunate. We're hopeful that everything will open up and that we would be able to have worship as normal on Easter Sunday. The churches will be packed with people excited to come together as a church community to worship, but we do not know what that may be like. I think that medical experts are saying that is probably unlikely, but we are still hopeful and prayerful that is the case. As we kind of lead into these, next Sunday is already Palm Sunday, and the Sunday after will be Easter, but we're transitioning, as I shared last week, slightly for a temporary period away from the study of Genesis, and just to study the Word, the Gospels of who Jesus is and was. Last week we talked about how Jesus was prophesied already in the book of Genesis, and that he had come, and the reason we celebrate Jesus is because of the bridge that he provides between mankind, humankind, and God that was broken through sin. And the fear that comes from the brokenness of sin that is bridged with Jesus' presence. And today, we look into another avenue of who Jesus was in the book of John, the Gospel of John in chapter 9. And we've all heard about Jesus is the one who gives sight to the blind. The worship song that we sang, Amazing Grace, I once was lost, now I'm found, was blind, but now I see, is a scripture passage that John Newton, the writer of Amazing Grace, took directly from this particular passage because of the blind man who says, "I once was blind, but now I see." And so it's an important aspect to understand that Jesus, if we were to say, who is Jesus, and the study of who Jesus is to say he is one who gives sight to the blind, right? This is something that we know. And as we kind of look into, the next couple of weeks of Easter Sunday, it's kind of, what can potentially happen in this circumstance that we're in. And talking with my sister the other day, she was worried that because people are now accustomed to this live stream, staying at home, worshiping at home, having service at home, not necessarily coming into the church, that people that can continue on even after the house, everything is open. And on the other hand, what I'm hopeful of is that people miss the community of being together. People, think back and say, "Oh man, it really was nice to be able to worship as a church community together. It really was a blessing to be able to come together in the house of the Lord, to worship together and to be in the presence of one another. Now, we don't even shake hands and greet people in a very, very distant way. Once all of this passes, maybe we can all have that affectionate handshake, hugs type of contact. But it's going to be an interesting time how we transition out of this, because it will change the way we interact with one another. It will change the way that we, clean and wash our hands and try not to touch certain things. And the mindset of everybody will change slightly. And but it's important for us to know that in all of this, the reaction of how we respond to all of this is not in fear, but in hope, as Christ was to all of us. In the gospel passages, as we transition out of the Old Testament narrative type of writing, the gospel passages shares about the life of Christ and his teachings, right? And in any of the gospel narratives and the gospel passages, it's our reaction to reading something like that would be, okay, well, who am I in this passage? When we read a gospel passage together and it talks about a parable or a Jesus miracle or a Jesus teaching, then our response should be, okay, who is Jesus communicating to, and who am I in this story? And in this particular story, in the Gospel of John, chapter 9, there are various people. There's the disciples, and there's the blind man, there are the Pharisees, there are the parents of the blind man. And so in these four different, and then there's Jesus, but none of us would ever be Jesus, so it leaves us with four. And our response should be, which of the four should be who we relate to? And this particular passage is a very, very rich passage because we can actually relate to all four of the people. In the very first interaction, the disciples see this blind man as they're walking by Jerusalem, and they say, who has sinned, this man or his parents? This was the custom of the time to believe that if somebody was born with some level form of a disability, it was because of a sin that had been committed by either the person who has suffering from the disability or the parents. And I'm not saying that that's never a possibility, because there can be times, because of the sins of a person or the sins of another, that there can be, unfortunately, a disability that is brought upon another. If somebody is, negligent in a pregnancy stage, then that can have unfortunate repercussions to the child. If I am sinful in something that I do, if I am acting inappropriately, I can harm somebody and physically disable them, and that would be my sin causing the disability of another. In this particular instance, that's not the case. There was a man that was born blind, which is not a result of somebody else's sin. And the disciples are asking Jesus things: who sinned, this man or his parents? And Jesus' response to that isn't, oh, it's this man, or it's the parents, or it's the ancestors, or whatever it may be. His response to this particular question, it is not important for us to focus on the sin of this person, but what God chooses to do through this disability. It's not about what this man has done. It's not about what his parents may have done, but it is what God intends to do with this particular instance. And the reaction of the disciples is always to be, right? And this is the same way that we oftentimes react to some type of misfortune. What caused this? What happened that resulted in this? The virus that we are suffering from, a lot of blame can go back and forth. A lot of weird theories can go back and forth as to why this is happening. Conspiracy theories, blame, there's different names that, and unfortunately, we see incidents of violence towards Asian Americans because of this preconceived notion that they are the reason that this is happening. And so it's, as believers, even as believers, we see something, we see misfortune, and the reaction to that would be for us to say, what caused that? What is the reason that happened? And the blame always goes on somebody else. And Jesus' reaction to that is, it's not about the blame or the sin or the mistake of somebody else, but it is what we can learn and what we can grow and what we can be blessed from that particular incident. And so, even reflecting on our current situation now, it's not about what is the reason for this and who is to blame for this pandemic. It is what can we learn from it? How can we grow and see God's work through it? How can we come out of it understanding and knowing God's influence in a greater way? That's what Jesus is teaching us through misfortune, through hard times, to say, let's not put blame as to the cause of it, but let's see what we can learn and how we can grow from it. And that is our reaction a lot of times as we have this disciple-like reaction to say, well, I want to know the cause. I want to know the reason this happened. But Jesus, who says, it's not about the cause. It's about what we learn and how we grow from it. The second reaction that we see is from the Pharisees. And the Pharisees they're upset, right? Because they have this, they're competing with Jesus, and they're very, very skeptical and trusting and believing in who Jesus is and was. And so their reaction, they have this blind man brought before them, and they say, well, what happened? Tell us what happened. This blind man says, this man, Jesus, he comes to me, he sees me, and he makes mud, he puts it on my eyes. I wash it in the pool of Siloam, and now I see. And the Pharisees are hung up on these random things, right? What are they caught up on? They're like, oh, he made mud? Because it is forbidden to work on the Sabbath day. Making mud, even though it's a small amount of mud, is forbidden. It's a forbidden task on the Sabbath because you're not allowed to work. That's what they're caught up on. They're caught up on this, oh, well, what is he? Clearly, he is not somebody who observes the Sabbath because he made mud. And the book of laws that the Jewish culture followed at this time is called the Mishnah. And in the Mishnah, if you look through, you're allowed to spit on the Sabbath, right? There's a lot of things you can't do. You're allowed to spit, but you cannot allow the spit to run. If you just spit and it stays on a flat surface, it's okay. But if it runs or if it creates some type of a groove in the dirt, then you're creating some type of a canal. And creating a canal and moving the form of the dirt is not allowed, right? It's a very strange book of rules, but that's what they follow. And so for Christ to then spit and then to pick up the dirt and to form something out of it was just absolutely, it was a tremendous no-no. And the Pharisees are focusing on this one act of this, breaking the Sabbath. And so the reaction then is for the Pharisees to say, okay, well, this is religion, right? Our religion is more important than the relationship. God sees broken people and he reaches out to broken people and he wants to heal that brokenness in people. But for sometimes others, they're focusing on, well, how is this done? What is the religion behind this? Where ultimately God's purpose in all of us is to be able to have a relationship with Christ and have a relationship with one another, to be a blessing on one another, instead of focusing on the strict formalities of what religion can and believe should be. And then the Pharisees, they hear the story of this blind man and they don't believe him, or formerly blind man, they don't believe him. And then so they go and they start asking other people, and then they come back and they tell them the story again. And the reason they do that is because the reaction of the Pharisees is that they don't want to accept an answer because it's not the answer that they want to hear, right? So a lot of us, we have that same type of reaction too, where we know visually what God is telling us, we know what God is showing us, but we don't want to follow what God is leading us to because it's not the answer or the direction that we want to know or we want to hear. And in the situation where this is what I want to do, this is what I want to believe, but God is saying, hey, this is not what was intended. If you do this, then you're kind of going aside from what I intended for you. And we refuse to obey that until we, hear the answer that we want to hear. That's what the Pharisees are essentially doing. They go and they ask the blind man, they get an answer, but it's not the answer that they want to hear. They go into the parents, they ask the parents, and the parents don't really give them anything, so then they go back to the blind man. Okay? They go back to the blind man, they ask him, hey, this is what you told us before, tell us again. The blind man's like, I already told you, but why are you trying to have me tell you again? And so he tells them, he says, no, Jesus is a sinner. He cannot have done this. blind man responds to that, and then what do the Pharisees say to that? The Pharisees' response is if this man were not from God, he could do nothing. And they answered, or this is what the blind man says it is. Jesus is of God because he opened my eyes, and a man who is not of God could not have done this. And the Pharisees respond to that, and they say, you were born entirely in sins, and you are trying to teach us. And they drove him out. It's almost like this petty response. It's a petty response of saying, hey, you keep saying things that I don't want to hear, so I'm going to personally attack you, right? It becomes a very childish thing to do, right? It's like you're in a debate. You're in a debate with somebody, and the other person who loses the argument runs out of things to say. You're like, yeah, well, you're ugly, that kind of thing. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense from the structure of the argument, but that's their response. They become very, very immature and childish. And in that same way, it's like, well, are we in that category as well? Are we in that category of saying, hey, this is the answer that I wanted, and God keeps leading me and telling me and showing me things that I don't want to see and I don't want to hear. Therefore, we become very, very immature and childlike in a way of saying, well, this is what I'm going to do because this is what I want, right? That's the reaction of the Pharisees. Do I see myself in that type of a response? And we see the reaction of the parents in this situation. The parents of the blind man, it's unfortunate. I don't want to say these are bad parents, but they have a child who was born blind. Maybe they were in a financial situation where they couldn't support him. Maybe they were in a situation where they couldn't take care of a blind child. But this blind man obviously was a beggar in the streets of Jerusalem. So clearly he wasn't living at home. So he was outcast from his family. And so, but the parents, they have their son now, who has now received his sight. A miracle for their son, who they thought that they had lost, now comes back to them, with his sight. They're not celebrating this. But when the Pharisees come to them and ask them about this, right? If we look back in the verse, in verse 18, the Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked them, is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see? This is the parents' response. We know that this is our son, that he was born blind. But we do not know how it is that now he sees, nor we do not know who opened his eyes. And they say, ask him, he is of age, he will speak for himself. Parents' response is, yeah, well, that he is our son, he was blind, but we don't know. Ask him. He's old enough to answer your questions on their own. They're not willing to take on the testimony of their son. Why? It says in the following verses, because they were afraid of being excommunicated by the synagogue. They were afraid of losing their community. They were afraid of being outcast by society. Therefore, they say, well, I don't want to answer this question. Ask our son. He is old enough to respond. It's kind of unfortunate that the parents would respond in this way because what they're valuing is social acceptance rather than showing and sharing in the testimony of their son. They're saying, I would rather choose to be accepted by my community, to have my relationships with my community, and to say everybody in my community and society will embrace me and accept me, than to say, this is my son who was transformed by the touch of Jesus Christ. And that type of response, a lot of times, is in our lives as well. It's this response of, I know what Jesus has done to me. I know what Jesus has done for me. I know what Jesus has done for my family. I know what Jesus has done for my loved ones. But it is more important for me to be accepted and socially connected with those. Therefore, I'm going to reject that and not respond to that. I'm going to just push that off and say, well, I have nothing to say because it's too dangerous for me to risk the relationships that I have with the ties of my community. Is that our response sometimes? See, sometimes our response to say, hey, you know what? This is my testimony of how God has transformed me, but I'm refusing to make that public. This is a testimony of how God moved in my life today, but if I share this, then people might think of me a little bit differently, So maybe I can just keep that to myself. It's a response that we say, well, when I'm hanging out with my friends or my community, if I do or say something that sets me apart as a believer, somebody who is a Christ follower, then they might think that I'm very conservative, and they might not include me in certain circles, and so maybe I should just keep silent. This is the reaction of the parents. This is also the reaction to a lot of us as well. The reaction that we are seeking after is the reaction of the blind man. The blind man who's been in this suffering for many years. It doesn't specifically say the number of years. In other parts of the gospel, we'll talk about a certain individual who suffered for how many years, but this particular blind man doesn't say. But for however long it may have been, and for any of us who's ever been, in darkness, it could never have been easy. But for this man to realize that something tremendous has happened to him, the first thing that he does is the response that he takes is one of faith. When we hear something, we say, oh, well, God is leading me to do something. And it's not an easy task. It's easy for us to even quit before it even begins. When Jesus puts, I don't know if he knew that Jesus spit and to make mud, but if, somebody were to spit and make mud and put it on my eyes, the reaction to that may be a little different. But he has spit, mud on his eyes, and Jesus says, wash it off in the pool of Siloam. And the pool of Siloam is not, just nearby. It's not just close by where he knows where it is. Remember, he can't see. And the distance from where he was in Jerusalem to the pool is a significant distance. And not only that, is for him to walk that distance was also a violation of the Sabbath. Like going back to making mud, the walking of this man from where he was to the pool of Siloam is a violation of the Sabbath. Jesus is telling him to break the Sabbath to experience and partake in this. To break the simple aspects of religion to grow in this relationship with Christ. And for him to be a blind man, to trust this stranger to him, to be able to take that distance and to be able to walk in faith, to travel, to make an effort on his own to experience and partake in that miracle. When we look at this and we say, well, wouldn't it have been just as easy for Jesus to say, open your eyes, and this man to receive his sight. It could have been just as Jesus does these types of miracles where he, walks by and he commands the healing. But in this particular case, there is this level of faith and action that is required of this man as well. It is not just a command healing, but it is a response to the command to say, I will walk and I will act in faith and I will respond in faith to partake in this miracle. And as he partakes in this miracle, what happens is that he doesn't take that and he doesn't just hold it in. He is able to share it with joy, with pride. And for him to be able to say, hey, this, I don't know, what type of response you're looking for. To the Pharisees, he said, I'm not an educated person, right? He didn't go to school. He was not trained in any particular form of way. But when the Pharisees, who have been educated their entire lives, who have studied the laws of the culture and the laws of Moses their entire lives, who are the elite of the elite when it comes to education, they have this debate with this person, and they cannot overcome a simple debate with this one person. Why? Because he can testify to what Christ has done in his life. For him to be a living testimony is to say, this is who I was before, and this is who I am now. And there's nothing that anybody can do about that. It is not a theological debate about what this teaching is, or who Jesus is, or how it contradicts the prophecy of the Old Testament. He does not engage in any type of this type of conversation. He says, this is my life as it is today. Before it was this, Christ enters my life, and now I am going today. And the response of the blind man is to say, for any of us to be able to openly share that testimony is to say, the person that I was before is not who I am now that Christ is in my life. When we can share that type of interaction, when we can share that kind of testimony, it's something that can be undisputed. When we can say there was a darkness in my life, Christ enters it, and now there is this light that I cannot hide away from. There was this depression in my life that Christ has entered into my life, and now I am in this joy that I cannot explain. There was this suffering in my life that Christ has now healed, and in this I live in this abundance that I cannot explain. This type of living testimony is for us to be able to say, this is who Christ is, this is what Christ has done for me. Christ has come, who he is the one who gives us this transformation of who we were before to who we are today. And for us to be able to openly and proudly be able to share that and to say, this is how Christ has transformed me. And in that, when we are able to share that type of testimony, there's nothing that anybody can ever do to refute that. Jesus, who he is, who he was, is the one who has come to us, to this earth, to give us sight. Because we might think that we are, we all see, I have my sight is perfectly fine. But we actually don't fail to recognize, what we actually fail to recognize is that we actually live in darkness. If our spiritual blinders are on, then we're actually in darkness. We are actually blind. The Apostle Paul, in the book of Acts, in the famous road to Damascus, in his encounter with Christ, it was in the middle of the day, in the Middle East, which would have been scorching hot sunlight in the middle of the desert. And he says that in that heat and in the middle of the day, a bright light shines upon him, some brightness that he could not overcome. It wasn't in the evening when the sun was setting, it was in the middle of the day that the light comes and shines. So when he encounters Christ, there is a light that actually shines and covers this darkness. In the same way, we think that, oh yeah, I see just fine, my vision is just fine, everything that I do, everything that I see is nice and clear. But until we encounter and we recognize that we are actually living in blindness, that we do not have true sight, who we are, who God has created us to be. This time that we're all kind of going through, trying to get through one day at a time with the stay home, lockdown, quarantine, whatever we may want to call it. And for a lot of us, it's an opportunity for just, to say, I was having a conversation with one of my friends yesterday, and like, what would quarantine life have been like 10 years ago? What would it have been like 20 years ago, right? Because 10 years ago, there's no Netflix, right? There's probably, Amazon Prime Video, none of that. I don't know. Well, I mean, it may have been around, but not a lot. It wasn't like mainstream. People may not have had access to it as regularly as people. 20 years ago, Blockbuster Video would have been shut down, right? You cannot rent, go to the places to rent movies. I don't know what we would have done in that time, 20 years ago, maybe 10 years ago. But today, because we have access to all these streaming movies, cable, Zoom, all kinds of Skype, FaceTime type things where people are interacting and they're doing these virtual happy hours and these virtual meetings and everything like that people can still get by this time. But is it a time for us to say, hey, how can I get by this day, this moment-to-moment time, and to maximize my entertainment? How can I get through this day to binge watch the greatest shows that are available, and to maximize that and until this quarantine is over so I can get back on with my life? Or can our response be, how can I react in a way to say, let me encounter Christ in a way that opens up my spiritual blindness, that gives me sight in my spiritual blindness? What can I do to be able to expand on this calling that God has given to me in this time? Instead of just trying to say, how can I get through each moment, through each day in the best way that I possibly can? Say, how can God give me more sight, give me more clarity in the prayer, in the devotion, in the quiet time, and the meditation, and all of these different things that are available to us to give us the spiritual clarity. And instead we say we're just going to focus on other things. We want to worry about getting back into alignment. Instead to say, instead of putting the blame on somebody else, to say, what is God going to show me through this? Instead of focusing on this religion, day-to-day stuff, to say, how is the relationship that God is going to bless me through with this, with Christ? Instead of trying to be accepted socially by the community, by society, to say, can I share my living testimony that nobody can disprove because of my transformation? At this time, we want to share a video for anybody who may be watching the live stream. It's going to be harder to see, but can you turn the lights off? And then there should be a YouTube link. Hopefully, if you can see it, just as an effort to kind of be a little productive in the week that we've had. We decided that we wanted to make a little video of, if we're all going to be, locked up anyways, then we're like, okay, well, if you're locked up in Korea, if you're locked up in LA, and we're in Seattle, we might as well make some worship out of it. So this video was made by and mixed together by Songyeon. Spent a lot of time the past couple of days doing this. It is with Chinu, who is in Korea, Seiyun, who is in LA, and Songyeon and me, who are here. So we'll post this video later on too if you can't see it very well. So enjoy. Against my love, Calvary, when Jesus bled and died for me, I see His wound, His hands, my Savior, that comes to me. His body broke, flesh and deep, laying down in closest to the ecstasy of every soul. Saw your seat and go. Oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Praise Him today, forever, forever His name. We will sing your praise, O Lord, O Lord our God. And breaker, Son of day, goes on, dreadful day, where we must be. The angels roar, the gods are here. Praise the name of the Lord our God. Praise Him today, forever, forever. We will sing your praise, O Lord, O Lord our God. Praise the name of the Lord our God. Praise Him today, forever, forever. Can we pray together? Heavenly Father, we're grateful that this is an opportunity, this is a time for us to reflect on the tremendous blessings that you've given to us in our lives. It is time for us and an opportunity for us to be able to filter out a lot of distractions that we might have and to focus on the sight that you wish to give to us in our spirit. That this is an opportunity for us to be able to not just get through each day moment by moment, but to say that our religion is overcome by our relationship with Christ. We're grateful for our community, our brothers and sisters, that we're wherever that we may be, that we can come together in heart and spirit to give you this time of worship. That we lift you up and we worship you. Pray for all things in Jesus' name. Amen. This past week, Tomlin and I spent a lot of time trying to figure out this live stream, and a lot of hours and lots of disappointment. It's not easy to connect the camera and everything, and the audio. We'll still continue to try and do this. So I know if anybody's on the live stream, the audio is a little weird. I think it might be even better for the audio on the stream if I don't use a microphone, because and people can respond and let me know feedback later on. But if I go into the microphone, then it might echo into the camera. So if for some reason we can't get the camera stream figured out, we have to, right now, if anybody were to see this setup, it is a Mac computer just turned around. But if for some reason we can't get this squared away, then let us know if this right now, without a microphone, sounds more clear than with the microphone. We'll test it out. We'll figure this out more so throughout the week. Hopefully everything, God's will be done, and everything is done in a way where we can quickly get back to our normal services together. But if that is not the case, then we'll do the best that we can to make sure that we are improving the streaming process. The video, just so if anybody was curious, it wasn't like they weren't singing in the camera and sounding like that. It was some tricky work. They audio recorded it, and then they lip sang the actual video. We had to sync the two together, and then we had to Sonia, audio did the work with the mixing the sounds and putting a little bit of effects in it. They don't sound like that singing into their webcam, right? So not that good. So it was a lot of, but we thought it would be cool to do, and it didn't. It actually took a lot longer than we thought it would be. We thought it'd be a lot more easy. We thought because it was the Zoom, everybody who's having these Zoom meetings, we thought, well, why don't we do like a worship service where we can all sing together with these Zoom screens? But obviously that doesn't work because of lags and the sounds that go back and forth. So then we're working towards, hey, what if we did this worship video from Korea to LA to Seattle, just to compile this. And then we saw these other videos that were popping up like yesterday that they were doing the same thing. I was like, hey, we're not copying these guys. We actually thought of this a while back. But Jimmy Fallon was doing it, and so and these other groups were like, I guess there was a high school that did a choir concert that way. And I don't know how they would have done it that way, but good on them. For us as a church community, we want to be creative in the way that we can dedicate this time in worship. So hopefully we can come together as a community here soon. But until that time, we will continue to try and enhance the live streams so that we can worship together as a church. Even if I don't know if anybody responding and whether or not this sounds better than using a microphone. About the same? Okay. They're saying it sounds about the same. So I'll use a microphone because I'm used to holding something in my hand. If we can
close our worship service this morning with a word of prayer. Father, we're grateful. We pray for all of those who are affected by this virus and the things that are just across this world. We pray as believers, as a church community, and a global church community, that it is our duty as believers and as followers of Christ not to look to the blame of saying this is somebody's fault or why this happened, but for us to say, what is God going to teach us through this? What is God going to show us through this? How is he going to move powerfully and teach us in this time? For us as a church community to be able to build up our courage and confidence to be able to share the testimony of the work of Christ in our lives instead of being afraid of what society might say. For us to be able to confidently speak out about the spiritual blindness in us that needs to be given new sight during this time that we can devote and dedicate. We're blessed we pray for all of our members, our elderly, that there's good health in their lives all throughout, that we can overcome this as a church quickly until we can come together and worship together again. We pray all things in Jesus' name. Amen. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and give you peace. Amen. Also, there is a link, I think, on the church website that for offering purposes. I know this is probably a difficult time economic for everybody, but there is an option to be able to give electronically as well for offering purposes.